Hello, this will be part 6 in the series History of the Hermetic, so especially looking at growth of Hermeticism in Europe. Well, it had actually already been established back in the time of Cosimo de' Medici, but this video I'm going to have a look at Heinrich Khunrath. Now, it's sort of going back into episode 1 when I looked at the Elizabethan period and John Dee and Hermeticism and how it led to Rosicrucianism was already growing, so it's a bit hard to define exactly that point, but here's a picture of John Dee, the alchemist, hermeticist, entertaining Queen Elizabeth. But this video will go over to mainland Europe and Heinrich Khunrath. Now, here are some of the of his works, and we'll go through them. Now, it's interesting because, like, for instance, I actually had these pictures in my collections, but I wasn't aware of Heinrich Khunrath and just how all these things bleed together. And there really was this very strong movement where these really influential people, again, in royal courts, but in other areas too, but how important this so-called, kooky mysticism is to the development of the modern sciences and our materialist world that we view in now. But this is a picture of Siena Cathedral in Italy. I've discussed this in regards to architecture, for instance, 288 feet, same height as the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., the same depth as the Texas state capitol in the series I did in regards to America and the Hermetic architecture. But in Siena Cathedral, this is one of on the floor, Hermes Mercurius Trismesticus, Hermes, Mercury, well, also you might have noticed the swastikas there as well, but also the tile pattern where we have the sun and the moon, and also you might notice that it's in a cubic form, so therefore it relates to the seed of life, which emerges from the Vesica Pisces. Geometry, astronomy, arithmetic, and music. Now, Heinrich Khunrath. Now, in this particular picture, you'll notice in the top corner we have a tetragrammaton. He's holding the compass, again another indicator, but also his fingers are at an odd angle. And Francis Yates points to the fact that Heinrich Khunrath was basically a link between John Dee and the later Rosicrucian or official. But earlier videos, for instance, I mentioned Robert Flood. He's holding the symbols. Here we see how royals and other important figures at that time are flashing gang signs. There's another way to, and it's depicted very constantly. And once your eyes are open to this, you really start to notice these things everywhere. These old artworks full of information. They didn't add all these little things on the side just by accident. They're actually transmitting something. Now, I won't use the European official language, but this is basically called the Alchemist Laboratory by Hans Vrinderman de Vries, and the figure inside the lab is Heinrich Khunrath. One of his artworks in one of his books, now whether he drew it himself, but it's in one of his manuscripts, the Emerald Tablet. Around this field, and you will see, maybe would have heard of the Emerald Tablet before. Again, it comes from Hermes Trismesticus, or Hermes, or Mercury as he was known to the Romans, or Thoth, which basically the god of sciences, all weights and measures, and commerce, and travellers, and these other points. But here's one of Heinrich Khunrath's depictions. Now they're in the yellow squares. I've just highlighted it because we have two very important, the same things which have been running throughout. So on the top we have the Tetractys, or the Pythagorean Tetractys, and on the lower we have the Tetragrammaton. So in Kabbalist traditions, Jewish mysticism, that's essentially the name of God. The Tetractys, again, it's the same pattern, this triangle, but there's quite a bit of information again, and especially number information. But if we begin with the Tetractys, the Pythagoreans swore an oath on the Tetractys. Now there are 10 dots in the Tetractys, and that's in Pythagorean schools, that was basically the number of God. Now, if we add them together, we get 10. If we multiply them down, we get 24. And you might notice in the third dimension that it's 10 squared. But again, so if you're a bit of a number file like myself. But in regards to the Tetragrammaton, in Kabbalist tradition, it's a name of God. So we have 72 parts, or 216 letters, and you'll notice that the depictions of this, well, that's where it comes from. Now, that's also in the Hebrew letter, the 21st letter, Sheen, which relates to fire, but in Freemasons they call it either the tiger's paw or the eagle's claw. It's got about raising one up. Now, in regards to 216 and 72, well, they're both precessional numbers, 2,160 years per age, 72 years per degree, and of course these numbers are, again, just overloaded with info. So whether it's Sun, Earth, Moon, New Jerusalem, geometry, Platonic solids, which also connect to the four elements, and again, just beautiful harmonic numbers in the random sea of infinite numbers. They like to, some would dismiss this as coincidence or some sort of religious delusion or something like that. Well, what can again, coincidence theory is as rampant as conspiracy theory, and yeah. Anyway, but here's another one of his pictures. It gets the pentagrammaton. But again, we see Sheen, the letter there as well. Again, in alchemy, very important because it relates to fire, but it's also important into the levels of Freemasonry. I'll put a link in the description to a really cool where Timothy Hogan talks about these things. But the top letter of that pentagram is Sheen, but the other four letters around it form the tetragrammaton again, which has also been connected to the Temple of Man. So if you would arrange those letters vertically, it pretty much draws out a man. But okay, that's if you. I really recommend Scott Onstott's series, Secrets in Plain Sight. Anything by Randall Carlson, just consume these things, and you'll find a lot more. Now, back to this image. Now, I've highlighted the center point, and we'll have a look again because the same themes. Now, if you've got a keen eye, you might notice Draco, Mercurius, or Draconis, Elohim, and these other points. But again, connects back to previous episodes and the famous image of Levi, which is usually described as satanic or whatever. Again, it's totally misunderstood, but we see this image. So both of them have the Kundalini, or the sign of Mercury, as in the planet Mercury or the element Mercury as well. And there we see, so I've just highlighted a little bit larger. So from the belly, and this will also, if you're into your chakras and stuff like that, you can also find connections there. But so you'll see these themes going across. Now, again, on the left hand, coagula, as in coagulated blood, or coagulation in the production of cheese, it's an alchemical process. On the other hand, we have solve, as in solvent or solution, which again is one of the 7 steps within alchemy, also one of the processes in officially recognized chemistry, and that's the basis of it. Now, also notice the flames on the bottom, calcination, that's another one of the steps in alchemy, basically burning something to ashes so you can extract the salts and all the chemicals from there. Again, still it's in an industrial chemical process, and they were doing it quite a long time ago. That's why they were able to make some beautiful stained glass and all these other things. It was not just this sort of Harry Potter-esque sort of type of stuff. It was a hard science in that form, but it was also a lovely science because it was imbued with so much more information. Now, both figures, for instance, we see the fusion of male and female, sun and moon. The depiction by Levi, we see the female breasts on what is a male form as well. So now Leonardo da Vinci, pardon, again we see this. Now Hermaphroditus was the hermaphroditic daughter of Mercury and Venus, which again, Mercury or Venus copper, again, it's an alchemical recipe. But you'll see this same theme throughout all sorts of depictions from that time. And the alchemical wedding of Christian Rosicrucians, and so the sun and the moon. So the sun king and the moon queen, or Apollo and Artemis would be another way to depict it. So what happens is it gets changed, by name, but the same themes consist going back to ancient times and since the Greco-Roman times, we've had excellent records are still intact. Before that, it gets a little bit iffy, but I like to deal with the fully recorded period. But okay, here's another one. So both the male and the female figure from their breast are spurting milk. Now that's another theme which is or even the female figure, the sun and the moon, and that was uh, by Mikkelspacher, I think it was. Anyway, yeah, but again, these same people. Now, this is another famous image, and you might notice rebus, and in itself, we see again rebus emerging from there, the fusion of the male and the female, as well as the heavenly bodies, sun and moon repeated, but also Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, as well as the Earth, of course. Now, if I highlight the center one once again, we'll see the same theme. The four elements, people are pretty, earth, fire, water, and air. And especially if you look into Geber, and because it's, again, the Harry Potter Hollywood treatment has really spoiled all of this. Now, there's also another key point in the very center, and if we do a comparison to this other piece, we see the symbol of Leo. Literally, Leo the lion is standing there, and again, if you pay attention to the details in this thing, so usually when you see the Sun King seated, you'll find Leo underneath his feet, as in Leo the astrological symbol. For instance, here there's a male figure on the right hand side, in the middle right, he's sitting on top of a lion, and on the left hand side we have the moon goddess Artemis again. But these also to point out anima, spiritus, and corpus. So the body, the spirit, and the internal being, the internal self as well. So which will nicely connects to the concept of the Trinity in Christianity. But also we'll see another repetition of fire and earth, as where fire and wind and air, but also water and earth as well. So again, these, like the way that the modern world will tend to treat these or look at these is through a very prejudiced lens, and I must say, because I myself was guilty of this, a very ignorant set. Now, people make all sorts of statements, very bold statements about what this is and what this means. Now, it's either satanic or it's some sort of kooky old religion with no value to it, and it's got nothing to do with science. Well, pardon my French, absolute fucking bullshit. It's loaded with it. The people who did this created the weights and measures, the scientific method. It's all emerges from this. And again, it's all this. I'm dealing with recorded, official, yes, well-recorded history, not extrapolating or anything like that. It's there. It's recorded, and unfortunately, we have zealots on the far side of religion who will just call it satanic, and then we have the zealots on the far side of the materialist academia who call it denounce it or deny its existence as well. And unfortunately, that's the state of affairs typically in the world, where you have polar extremes to one another, and the truth gets destroyed by extremists. And extremists is not just to do with religion, it's also to do with materialists. But anyway, with that, hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.